Hey, ¿qué pasa, Calexico? Welcome back to the podcast. Like always, before I begin, I want to thank my sponsors. My anchor sponsors are my friends Jake, Sergio, and James. Thank you guys for sponsoring the podcast. Also, if you guys want to become a sponsor, make sure you check out my Facebook page. You'll help the podcast, a lot by sponsoring it. Also, if you're a local business, you can always hit me up and I'll do a sponsorship for the podcast. Also want to thank my friends here at Golden Dragon in Calexico, one of the tastiest Chinese food here in town. They're located at 928 South Imperial, next to Batman Stereo. I want to thank my friends Patty and Frank for allowing me to record today's episode here. And also, before I begin and introduce my guest, I want to make sure that I make it clear that I'm not endorsing my guest today. He's just a guest, and I want people to get to know, the candidate for this position that he's running for. And also want to invite any other candidate, to the podcast to come on and, talk about, their campaign. Today's guest is JB, Hamby. Sorry, JB Hamby. Sorry. I get confused because we were talking about, your name and how I got to know you as Brooks Hamby, sure. And now it's John, and now it's JB. So like JB.
Well,
Hamby.
It's basically, as we talked about, it simplifies things a little bit. I've been known as Brooks my whole life. My family's called me JB off and on, and my first name is John, so I'm John Brooks Hamby. But sometimes people hear it as Brock or Brooke or something like that. So we're just simplifying, streamlining. JB is a little bit more iconic, and so we're just going to stick with that as purpose of the campaign. But you can call me anything as long as it's not 4 letters and not nice. So.
No, I'll call you JB. JB is it's easier to remember and easier to say it. But yeah, usually when I have my guests on, I let them tell us a little bit about themselves. So sure. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I've been an Imperial Valley resident all my life. My great-grandfather came here to Imperial Valley on the back of a freight train in the middle of the Depression, leaving basically the panhandle of Texas, which was pretty hit hard by the Dust Bowl. He left seeking some opportunity in Imperial Valley. Didn't intend to stay here, but ended up doing so. And so he settled in around the Westmoreland area, worked for IID a little bit, dug some ditches, and some of the early reclamation work in the 1930s and 40s. Built a bee business. My grandfather joined into that. My dad also grew up around the Westmoreland area. He himself put himself through college, built a farming business over time. And then, so anyway, I grew up in Brawley myself. I went and attended Stanford for my university education, studied history and classics there. And took some time off from school in my sophomore year, actually a couple quarters, and I built a business in El Centro. It was called Upspace. It's basically like a collaborative workspace that we took from a pretty nasty gym and turned it into this kind of neat, interesting, creative, collaborative workspace, much like they have in other places like a WeWork, for instance. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of great stuff came from that. It wasn't something we were able to sustain over time. It's something that's definitely needed in the Valley, but there's a lot, as you know, in the sort of creative industry here, especially as it applies to entrepreneurship, there's a lot further we need to go as it applies to encouraging that culture of entrepreneurship here. So I'm very passionate about that. Went back to school, took some time, and worked in Washington, D.C., studied there as well for an office in the Senate for Senator Ben Sasse. Before that, I was a page for Senator Barbara Boxer on the floor of the U.S. Senate as a junior in high school. So if there's any juniors in high school or anybody approaching that age, I highly encourage you to apply to be a U.S. Senate page, either through Senator Feinstein's office or Senator Kamala Harris's office. Basically, it's a summer-long or school year-long opportunity, or at least a semester, to basically be a page for, in this case, because we're in California and on the Democratic side of the Senate, you basically sit on the Senate floor, you assist the senators in anything and everything they need, from carrying bills around and getting them water or whatever. You basically do whatever the senators need. And so that was a really unique and interesting opportunity that I had the chance to do. So anyway, finishing off with my schooling, I attended Oxford for a while and finished that up this year and studied classics and some politics there. Returned to the Valley, graduated, and basically have been living and enjoying the summer, of course, here. And one of the most critical things that I've been studying and paying attention to over time is water in Imperial Valley. As I say a lot, without it, we have nothing here. Water is life in Imperial Valley. This place would be nothing if it were not for water. People worked so hard over so many generations to bring water to Imperial Valley. From the earliest days with the California Development Company to the flood of the Colorado River rushing through the Imperial Valley, creating the Salton Sea as we know it today, and the struggles that occurred at that time to the formation as a result of that incident of the IID, Imperial Irrigation District, in 1911, to basically take over the roles of diverting water from the Colorado River, delivering it to those who need it in Imperial Valley, and draining it away to the Salton Sea, where agriculture in Imperial Valley has a symbiotic relationship with the Salton Sea, sustaining just this plethora of wildlife that wouldn't exist if it were not from the Salton Sea. And so it's so critical that we keep Imperial Valley's water in Imperial Valley. There's so many pressures abounding, not just within Southern California, but across the entire Colorado River Basin, which encompasses 7 states in the United States and also 2 in Mexico. And we have to be on our guard and protect this most precious resource that we have. Everybody else wants it. We need to keep it here. Water is life. It creates jobs, opportunity, environmental benefits, and without it, we don't have any of those things. And that's not something I would like to return to in this valley, nor anybody who I've been knocking on their doors want to see happen. This place is not supposed to be a desert. People work so hard to turn it into the winter garden of the world, in many ways, is what they referred to it in the first couple decades of the valley's history. And we don't want to go back to that. We've got to keep the water here. We've got to work and push back against these interests that want to build their economy at our expense by moving our water to their needs. We have our own needs here. Their environmental needs, their economic needs, and their cultural needs as well, because this place would be nothing if it were a Barstow or just a desert city. That's not a place anybody wants to live. I want to live in a green, healthy, productive, viable Imperial Valley with beautiful parks and green spaces and productive agriculture. I think that's what a lot of people want here in Imperial Valley, and that's what we need to protect.
One of the biggest things that's, I guess, circulating the IID and the board and stuff like that is the IID versus body lawsuit. What do you know about that lawsuit, or what have you?
Yeah, so there's been historically a lot of tension between the agricultural community and the IID over various perspectives on water rights. This is my position. Basically, we have a choice here. Do we want to be Palo Verde Valley, or do we want to be Yuma? And what I mean by it is this, is in the Palo Verde Valley, you have a situation where that irrigation district has made the choice that they wanted to engage in water transfers with Metropolitan. As a result of that, their valley has basically cratered. The city of Blythe is basically tanking. If you drive around there, it looks like a ghost town at this point, and that wasn't true a number of years ago. By contrast, you have the Yuma area, which is not, it's kind of set up in a very different way than how California irrigation districts or water districts are set up, and that there's a number of associations and irrigation and drainage districts. I forget how many of them, but there's maybe about 8 or 9 or something, the largest of which is the Welton Mohawk Irrigation District. And basically what Yuma is very clear about, and they have the same sort of urban pressures that we have in Imperial Valley with the urban coast, but basically when Central Arizona comes knocking at the door of Yuma, there's no answer. And so basically Central Arizona has been trained over time to recognize these Yuma guys are serious about protecting their water rights, and that doesn't mean merely title to water rights, but they want that water used in the Yuma Valley and the Welton Mohawk Valley and that whole area. And so as it pertains to Imperial Valley and our water rights, it's really broken into 2 parts. First, the Imperial Irrigation District has a right on the Colorado River to divert water, and that takes the form of a contract with the United States Department of the Interior to divert that water off of the Colorado River. At that point, the IID delivers that water to the Imperial Valley, where under the decision, Bryant v. Yellen just clarifies that landowners within the Imperial Irrigation District service area have a right to continued service appurtenant to their lands. What does that mean exactly? Well, landowners isn't exclusive to agricultural land. That means any land within the IID service area has a right to be served water. And so that's pretty excellent in that there's no quantified amount. You don't have a cap. You can use as much water as you need as long as your use is reasonable and beneficial. That's a pretty awesome thing. Our water right is second to none on this entire basin, covering 7 states and 2 more in Mexico, in the sense that we have the largest amount of water. We're the single largest, we have the single largest water right on the entire Colorado River system, but we also have one of the oldest rights. Basically, we're only second to Palo Verde Valley and then the Bard irrigation area close by Yuma around Winter Haven. And so basically, we have this enormously precious water right. And it is so vitally important that we keep it here for use here. We have to keep our water in our valley. It shouldn't be sent anywhere else to develop or grow their economy. We have to use that water here for the benefit of Imperial Valley exclusively, nobody else's. We have already sacrificed more than anyone on the entirety of this river system practically combined. We're already transferring to the tune of 500,000 acre-feet a year of water. And to San Diego alone, we're selling about 100 billion gallons a year for the San Diego region.
So, but the IID is selling that water, or who's selling that water to?
Yeah, it gets into a whole number of things that maybe it's a bit more complicated than the podcast allows. But basically, in 2003, there was a water transfer that was agreed to between IID and a variety of number of water districts and irrigation districts within California. Coachella is a beneficiary of that. The Coachella Valley Water District, San Diego, gets about 280,000 acre-feet a year from that. Metropolitan gets some too. And so basically that 2003 water transfer, and this is why this election is so important and why the decisions made at IID generally are so vitally important, is because the decisions that get made are not like the county or a city or a school board or any other special district. The decisions that get made as they pertain to water in Imperial Valley are practically permanent. For instance, that 2003 agreement will be in place. In 2003, I was in first grade. When that QSA expires, or the main portion of it is done, I'll be in my 80s at that point. I'm nowhere close to my 80s right now. Can't see that maybe through audio, but definitely in person. And so the decisions that get made are either so long in terms of length, or they are permanent. And we have to ensure that in everything we do, that we keep our water in our valley, understand that the water transfers have gone far enough. We have to protect the Salton Sea, and we have to keep our valley whole. Presently, the water transfers have been absolutely devastating for Imperial Valley as it applies to our local economy, and the Salton Sea has basically been decimated. I was visiting the Salton Sea yesterday, walked around Red Hill Bay and La Playa and everything, where I've been a few times over the past year and recorded videos and stuff where dust is just blowing off of the playa, whiteout conditions, almost like a blizzard. And so basically, what learned, which is just more of what we already know, is 99.5% of the fish population has been decimated over just the past 4 years alone. 1 to 200,000 birds a year that used to fly and enjoy the Salton Sea, which is kind of, it's called an accident in many ways. Yeah. But the real wonderful thing about the Salton Sea is that 95% of the wetlands have been destroyed in California. That is a lot of territory that birds used to enjoy, to enjoy as habitat, to feed and breed and everything else.
So
that's disappeared.
They use it as a rest area.
Yeah, and so basically the Salton Sea has become this refuge for these basically homeless birds at this point that fly from Argentina to Alaska as part of the Pacific Flyway.
Yeah.
And so 1 to 200,000 of them are no longer coming back to Imperial Valley at the Salton Sea, which is about 2/3. That's really devastating if you're a bird, many of which have died as a result of bird die-offs, where their available habitat and feeding areas have become so few in number and so condensed that the birds get physically very close to each other, and disease passes between them pretty rapidly at that point, and thousands of them have already died this year through, I think, one if not two massive bird die-off events.
I bet you get this question a lot, and I want to see, your feeling towards it when people ask you, you're 24?
23.
23. When people ask you, aren't you a little bit too young for this position? Like, what do you say to that?
What's interesting, I've been knocking on doors and talking to various people, and of the people that I've actually talked to, I say, I'm always worried a little bit. Is this a age thing, a problem? And the response is like, no. And something that multiple people have told me is that age is not the same thing as maturity. And as it pertains to these discussions about water and the vital importance of what happens specifically between now and 2026 on the Colorado River, as key agreements expire that basically govern and manage how the entire Colorado River basin and how the Colorado River works, it's so important that you have that foundation and that knowledge. And I basically studied this intensively for the past number of years here, and I've traveled the basin, visited every major dam in the entire system, and also about 20 different events I've traveled to in Colorado and Utah and New Mexico, Arizona, throughout California, and trying to understand not only Imperial Valley's issues internally, but how we play an immense and major role across the entirety of the Colorado River system, which, to be clear, covers the upper basin is Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming, which most of the precipitation and snowpack, that's where most of the Colorado River originates in the Rocky Mountains. And then the lower basin states of California, Arizona, and Nevada, and then also Mexico is a component of the basin as well. They enjoy rights to about 1.5 million acre feet per year. The upper basin and lower basin each get about 7.5 million acre feet, although the upper basin doesn't use their full entitlement. And in Mexico, of course, the two states are Baja California and Sonora. So as it applies to the age question, I've been told a lot, go for it. Age is not the same thing as maturity, and what we need is Imperial Valley to play a central leadership role on this basin as we move forward, and it's so vital to have that knowledge, that passion, that foresight, ultimately, and optimism about where Imperial Valley can be. We don't need to be in a position and believe that we're just in a place where we have to manage decline, that Imperial Valley's best days are behind us, because they don't have to be.
Yeah.
Our best days can be ahead, but it's only if we have passion, if we have foresight in planning for our future, and we believe that we do have a position of strength, and we can work with others across this basin to partner together for a better future for Imperial Valley and so many of those across the Colorado River Basin that share our same issues, concerns, and pressures, and work together for what's going to benefit us all.
Yeah. I know you said you didn't really care who you were running against, and you even quoted it's kind of hard to pronounce his name, but
Dilip Singh Sand.
Yeah.
He's a great figure.
But I mean, at the end of the day, I know the person that's in there right now has a lot of experience.
Sure.
He's been on the board for a while. Does that kind of intimidate you? Like, does it, do you feel that people might think that somebody that, that's older, been in this position for a while, might be a better person to be put on there?
Yeah, that's a really good question to consider. And again, I'm not in this race to speak down or poorly about anybody, just as I wish they wouldn't do so about me, and that we focus on the issues and the qualifications for this position and where we want to take Imperial Valley as it applies to specifically the water issue, but also power as well. And in that regard, there is experience that's gained through time, but there, as part of experience or capability for the position, is also knowledge and also intuition about the best decisions that need to be made. I would say this is that in 1997, the then Interior Secretary Bruce Babbitt threw down the gauntlet at something called CRUA, which is the Colorado River Water Users Association. And it's an annual gathering of basically everyone who uses Colorado River water from all across those states and Mexico too. And they meet every year at Caesar's Palace of all the places in Las Vegas, Nevada. And he basically stated that, look, here's what's going to happen. He pointed this finger specifically at IID and said, this is what's going to happen to you. 1997 went by, 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001, 2003. In that time period, basically little happened, and exactly what Bruce Babbitt said would happen in 1997 is exactly what happened in 2003. As we're moving forward in dealing with the Colorado River Basin, and as these key agreements, the 2007 interim guidelines governing the operations of Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the Hoover Dam and Glen Canyon Dam, and as the drought contingency plan, which IID is not a participant in and should not be, expire basically on December 31st, 2025, it's very critical that we understand that what we're going to face in 2026 is almost identical in every way to what happened in 2003. And the question is when voters sit down at their kitchen table or go to the voting booth and they have their ballot, as we're looking ahead for Imperial Valley, I would suggest this, that every decision I make, I will have to live with it for a very long time, whether it's a good decision or it's a poor decision. And I've got another 70 to 75 years of life in me. Fingers crossed. Yeah, knock on wood. And I cannot afford to make a bad mistake here. I cannot afford to sit at home and not work hard at this. And this is not saying that anybody else would or does, but this is saying that the issues and the gravity of what we're facing over the next couple of years are so immense. It is so vitally important that we have the energy, the passion, the foresight, and the willingness to have the Imperial Irrigation District once again play a major leadership role across the entire Colorado River Basin, as we did in the beginning of this basin. A brief bit of history, which I really enjoy, is basically in 1911, the IID was formed. Overwhelming public vote formed the Imperial Irrigation District, some, 1,100 votes to 300 or something like that. Much smaller population at the time. But we still benefit with what they did then, which is a key theme here. And so 1911, the IID was put together. A guy named John Eshelman and then also Phil Swing, he'll come up in a second, were the ones who were integral in putting that together. Fast forwarding to 1922, the Colorado River Compact was basically ratified. Imperial Valley played a central role in the formation of the Colorado River Compact, which basically did a couple of things. It divided the river into the upper basin and the lower basin and basically apportioned out the volumes of water each basin would enjoy. Also called for the creation of the Hoover Dam, which we tend to think of the Hoover Dam in terms of energy production or also storage of water, but that's not the number one purpose of why the Hoover Dam was created. And the history is very clear on this. The Hoover Dam was created as flood protection specifically for Imperial Valley.
I didn't know that till I went to visited the Hoover Dam. I was like, wow, that's crazy.
And there's a great exhibit there over on the Nevada side of the dam where they have kind of this interactive exhibit theater. I don't know if you've been to that, but I recommend everybody to go and visit that. They have a little diorama, and Imperial Valley is a pretty big central part of the whole thing.
Yeah, we went like 2 summers ago, I think.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting, the history of why it was built.
And it always starts with Imperial Valley, which is something we don't tend to think about. Like, we think of ourselves as small, powerless, we don't have political representation and these sorts of things. But if you look at the history, Imperial Valley has played the central role. So there was the formation of the IID, then it is applied to the compact, which split up the basin, which the compact more or less operates like the Constitution, if you will, for water in the southwestern United States. Also called for the creation of the All-American Canal and the Hoover Dam, or as they called it, the Boulder Canyon Dam at that point. It later was located in the Black Canyon, and then it was renamed Hoover Dam. So it went through a couple of iterations there, kind of like my name. So
Yeah, have something in common.
so that was a core issue there. And Imperial Valley was running around. We had various leaders who helped put that agreement together. And then as we move forward to 1928, Phil Swing passed the Boulder Canyon Project Act. He was the co-author of it. And basically what that did is it built the Hoover Dam, which, as we talked about, was primarily for flood protection. So Imperial Valley didn't experience another flood menace as was experienced from 1905 to 1907 when the diversion works basically were flooded out due to a flood on both the Gila and the Colorado River at that time. Flooded the entire contents of the Colorado River as it had historically done, and then created the modern Salton Sea as we know it today. And so Phil Swing worked very long and very hard to put that together. The entirety of the Southwest has benefited from what he did as the congressman from Imperial Valley for Southern California, basically, but he was from here in El Centro and was the former general counsel of IID. Similar to that, in those three events, Imperial Valley has to play that central leadership role. And the reason this is so critical and the way our mindset needs to work is we should not play chess or checkers today. We should be looking to play chess over the next 50 years because there are many diverse interests that are working against us. We have to be looking far ahead in terms of our work that we might not even get to benefit from ourselves, but that future generations will.
You keep talking about future generations or you being young. Despite people asking you like, oh, are you too young? What do you tell like young people that are thinking of running for elected positions? What do you tell them? Like, because I know me and Gil had a conversation as to like saying that we feel like more young people
Right.
need to get involved and what do you think about younger people generations getting involved in?
I absolutely recommend that. There's basically four sorts of government in Imperial Valley, and I shouldn't even use government. It's local representation and participation in key aspects of our civic life. It's not government, which is not the greatest way to describe things. But it's basically you have school boards, you have your city councils, you have your county suite of offices, from county board of supervisors to tax assessor and various other things like that. And you have the IID, which is in this position of serving water and power to the people of Imperial Valley. And then also Coachella as it applies to the power consideration. And so as we look forward, it's so important that young people get involved in running for office. It's first important to do things for the right reason, which is, in the case of our schools, everybody benefits from strong schools. Our economy benefits, students themselves benefit. If we have strong, highly performing schools, and this is, it's just about having the right priorities, about putting student success first. That's very critical. In the case of our cities, it's about thinking about land use and about building community in our cities. And in the case of the county, there's many important considerations there as the county basically ties everything together. It's important for young people to do it for the right reasons, and consider your participation. And basically we describe it like this. It shouldn't be, it's my turn. It should be, it's my turn. And it's kind of this very New Englandy sort of very town hall sort of mentality, which is it's just a necessary burden that you have to, as a good citizen, take on in your life. It shouldn't be something you do for name. It shouldn't be something you do for prestige. It shouldn't be something you do for, your own personal glorification. It's something to do because it's a necessary burden you have to bear to basically pay it forward. So many people have done it for us in terms of school boards and building cities and putting this county together and bringing water and preserving it here in Imperial Valley. And it's incumbent upon each of us to consider whether we're called to that as this necessary burden of service to the rest of the community.
Another topic that people talk about recently is the AB 854.
The hijacking bill.
Yeah. What do you know about it, and what are your thoughts on it?
Here's basically the summation of it. There's an agreement, I believe the date on it was signed was in 1933, and it's a water agreement. At the time, there was the Imperial Valley, which was already settled and irrigated. The Coachella Valley was basically nothing. There was no golf courses, there was no subdivisions, there was none of this. Basically, it was sand hills and jackrabbits at that point, as some people describe it. So what happened is, as the Boulder Canyon Project Act was put together and the Hoover Dam was being put together and the All-American Canal and all of that was being considered and built, the question is basically the Department of the Interior at that time said, well, why do we need these two separate areas? Let's just combine it all, the Coachella Valley and the Imperial Valley, and just put it all under the auspices of the Imperial Irrigation District. So the Coachella Valley people at that time said, no, we don't want that. We want to have our own space up here. We don't want to be part of the Imperial Valley. And at the time, there were some financial issues going on with the IID because of the enormity of the expense of basically building the system for water delivery, which we enjoy today tremendously. It's extremely efficient. It's very low cost. It's entirely gravity fed, but building the whole thing was a monumental expense, and everybody pitched in basically for that. Coachella people looked at that and said, we don't want to be part of this. So there was an agreement put together, and it was primarily a water agreement in which it said, okay, Imperial, you stay down there. We're going to form our own thing. We're going to be the Coachella Valley County Water District. Now it's Coachella Valley Water District. They took the county word out of it. And basically they said, here, you stay out, and in exchange, more or less, you can have our power, the three elements, generation, distribution, and transmission in the Coachella Valley. It didn't name those three things specifically, but that's basically how power works in a nutshell. Mm-hmm. And this was because the All-American Canal, as you can see in the drops coming from the Colorado River coming to Imperial Valley, there's a number of drops on the river that generate a pretty good amount of energy. And so that was originally how this is a long story. I mean, there's a lot of history to it, but it's important. And that's basically how IID got into the energy business, was because of the hydroelectric capability of the All-American Canal and those various drops. The intention was to put drops also on the All-American Canal branch that went to Coachella. It didn't end up happening for whatever reason. But the whole idea was, here, you stay out, Imperial. We're going to do our own separate thing up here. And in exchange, you can take care of our power. And you can give us like 8% or something of the net proceeds, basically. There's many aspects of that. But basically, fast forwarding from that agreement to today, basically the agreement said that there is a 99-year lease. It's unclear exactly what that means, but as it applies to AB 854, Coachella, this was a water agreement. Let's make that very clear. There's Imperial Irrigation District, had our water issues, and then the Coachella Valley County Water District had their own thing. Mm-hmm. And so this was an agreement between two water districts, and CVWD said, here, you take care, we're going to sub out this whole power responsibility to you, IID. We don't want to take care of it. And then you can pay us a little bit of money for it. So it was a water deal between these two agencies. But lots of population has moved into the Coachella Valley, which makes for an interesting situation in that IID serves power to the Coachella Valley, but its primary responsibility, and the reason it was formed, was to deliver water for irrigation and for other domestic uses in the Imperial Valley. And so our IID Board of Directors is elected by Imperial Valley residents and voters, not Imperial County, but Imperial Valley specifically within the water service area. And Coachella Valley power users already have their own representation on the Coachella Valley Water District. which they have 5 board members as well. But there's this concern from various politicians in the Coachella Valley that this is taxation without representation. And the very short answer on that is, if you look at a map of California, you have very large swaths of PG&E, of San Diego Gas and Electric. You've got Southern California Edison. These are all what are called investor-owned utilities. They have a very high charge on their, basically your monthly power bill, although it's less on the coast because the climate's a little bit different, but the rates are much higher. And that's the reason for that is, one, there's concerns about the costs of delivering the power, but also the risks, as we're seeing with the fires and everything. But then the other major concern is that these investor-owned utilities are investor-owned, which means that investors have these utilities are put together for profit. Yeah. The investors get a profit. IID and SMUD is another great example, are basically the 2 lowest cost power providers in California. SMUD, of course, stands for the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. They don't provide water, just power. And it's very low cost as well. And so my reason in giving this background is that for most Californians, if you live in California, you live in LA, you live in San Diego, you live in San Francisco, the Bay Area, you do not get to vote for your power utility. Your power utility board is an investor board of directors. It is not anything publicly elected. And so what the IID provides is something kind of unique and odd in the sense that we provide the lowest cost power in California to our customers in the Coachella Valley who enjoy really low cost power. There's a street, I forget which is the name of the street, but on one side it's IID, and then on the other side is Southern California Edison. If you live on the Edison side of the street, your power bill is much, much higher than your bill is if you're on the IID side of the street. So now if I'm a Coachella Valley resident, I would think that I'd be pretty happy with this agreement. I mean, I get to vote for my CVWD board. CVWD gets some money from IID for our power bills. We get very low power rates, the lowest basically in California. Pretty sweet deal. Yeah. But there's interests up there that are not happy with it. They basically want us, and getting back to your original question, with some of this background behind it, is that there are interests who want to place a majority control of Riverside County, as it was originally described in AB 854, which is not inclusive of the Coachella Valley. I mean, it reaches way out to like Temecula and different places, which doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And so it basically would place a majority of the board from the Coachella or Riverside County area, and then basically make Imperial Valley a minority on our own board. That was never how the 1933 or 1934 agreement was set out. It was an agreement between 2 water districts, an irrigation district and a water district, to basically hammer out some disputes and some litigation that was occurring at that time over various water issues, and then basically say, hey, you stay over here, we'll stay up here. And then it's become an opportunity to basically hijack the IID board. And the most insidious and scary thing about it is the potential for basically a majority of outside interests to have majority control and a majority say over water in Imperial Valley. Yeah. All these internal disputes we have about water go out the window at that point, because it's we already feel powerless enough as it is, as it applies to the state and federal governments. But at that point, we don't even have control over ourselves. Very scary. Lots of interest working against us. We got to protect ourselves. There's a lot of planning that has to go ahead into what happens at the expiration or the end of this lease, which is unclear what that even means. But the most important thing is we've got to protect our ratepayers in Imperial Valley, and then also those in the rest of Imperial County who enjoy the lowest cost power rates in California, and then also protect our water and keep it here and ensure that only Imperial Valley people have a say over Imperial Valley water. Nobody else.
Yeah. So you're running for District 2, right?
That's right.
And what areas? I was gonna check the map, but I totally.
Sure. So the IID Division 2 covers El Centro, where I live, where the sun spends the winter, and Heber and Sealy as well, and basically the south eastern corner of Imperial Valley. There's also a branch that reaches out into the West Desert, like Superstition sort of area. The history on that is, and it also occurred, this is IID Division 5, which is Holtville, Imperial, and a little bit of Calexico, which is a separate district, which also covers the East Mesa. And the reason that these desert areas are included in the IID Water Service areas, there was originally an intent to irrigate both the West Mesa Desert and the East Mesa Desert too. There's a number of reasons why that didn't exactly happen at the time. They wanted to, but there's no reason we shouldn't do that. So
Division 2, I thought for some reason, because you used to live in Brawley, right?
No, I haven't lived in Brawley for some time. I live in El Centro.
Oh, okay.
I basically graduated from school. I've worked in El Centro for a number of years, opened up space, and decided I really like El Centro. I like sleeping 5 minutes from where I work, which is where I work like 18 hours a day, basically, and greener pastures and all that.
Yeah. I mean, we've been talking a lot about water, in terms of the ID, but being in the board. Well, first of all, what do you think of this current board, and how do you think you would bring or make it, a better board than it is now?
Sure. So one of the most critical things is our participation on the Colorado River. And this board brings with it a lot of Imperial Valley experience. I think what could be enhanced is having a team effort to basically work across the Colorado River Basin with our partners who are very similar to us in places like Western Colorado, New Mexico, and other agricultural and rural areas that share many of our same concerns and many of our same interests and the same pressures as well. And so this board is in a position, and this is why I look forward to working with this board if and when elected in March or November, to work together collaboratively to ensure that Imperial Valley plays that central leadership role. And everybody brings a different skill to the table, but it's so essential that we all work together toward the most important issues that are ahead of us, and those are some of the background, the knowledge, the education and experience that I bring to the table and look forward to working on, especially.
Going back to the water thing, we've been talking a lot about water, but something that we also have an abundance of is sun.
Yeah. Oh yeah. A lot of sun.
What is
I feel it when I'm out for more than 15 minutes.
What is the deal with because I have solar panels, but I don't really know how that works. My wife dealt with all that, and I really know.
Yeah.
What's the deal with the IID and residents and solar panels, and what's the deal with that? Do you know?
There's a couple things. First, I'll start off on the residential issue, and then second, I'll go into the potential for solar, and then third is the issue with solar as it exists in Imperial Valley. So first, solar is great. It's important that we engage in all kinds of renewables as we move forward. The challenge is, as it applies to rooftop solar, is everybody, imagine hooking up their solar panel on their roof, which I guess state law has now changed for any new building, that it has solar basically on top or as a component of any new building taking place in California. The problem is there's basically this thing called the duck curve. If you've heard of that, and basically, so as people are waking up in the day, power consumption is going up, and it continues to go up throughout the day, and it basically peaks when people are coming home, turning on their dishwasher, their washing machine, their dryer, and stuff, air conditioner, especially in the summer, about 5, 6, 7 p.m. That's peak at that time, and then as people are going to bed, it tanks down. But overlay that, so it basically goes up and then down a little bit. Overlay that with solar. So when solar comes in, it reduces the need to generate energy. So up, people are waking up, the sun's coming up, and then the higher the sun is in the sky, basically, the more solar generation there is. And then as the sun goes down, it peaks back up. So what happens is in the middle of the day, there's a lot of solar energy that's just flooding into the grid. And then toward nighttime, 5, 6 p.m. and everything, when everybody's coming home, there's a lot of demand, but the sun sets at that point. So basically what happens is with the duck curve, it looks like a duck, which is why it's called that. When you lay the demand versus the bite that solar takes out of it, is you basically have to turn down your generation in the middle of the day, which in the case of Imperial Valley, like geothermal is pretty good and low cost and everything. And then you have to buy solar because it's just flooding the grid. And then when everybody comes home and everything and the sun goes down, all of a sudden you've got to ramp up your generation. And so it kind of wreaks havoc on the grid. It poses the risk for a rate increase because of the needed, very expensive peak generation of energy rather than maintaining a solid base supply. So that's kind of the issue, as I understand how IID has dealt with it in the past. The potential for better customer knowledge about these issues, but basically it's an engineering issue and a budget issue at the end of the day. And if our prime goal is to ensure that everybody has the lowest rates practicably possible and the potential for lowering rates or reinvesting savings into the system for better reliability, the solar thing is it's a new technology. It's caused some challenges all over the place, just not in Imperial Valley, but that's kind of been the policy decision that's been made, and it's important to keep the rates low here. And kind of some of the stresses has been there's some who can afford the solar panels, and they get a cut off of their power bill because they're basically selling power into the system, but then there are a lot who cannot. And so the effect is with unlimited solar, basically, what that would do is those who can afford it can pay less, and those who cannot afford it are going to basically face higher power costs. And that's just not very fair. It's something to think through even further and how to communicate these issues. But if our goal is to have the lowest rates possible for everybody, that's an important consideration.
So maybe a good way to look at it is maybe to invest in a way to store that energy that we're creating?
Yes, and so that's a critical issue on the question of storage. In the middle of the day where you have this flood of solar energy, there's places like LADWP, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, who's investigating the potential for basically building a water battery, if you will, which is using all of that abundance of solar energy in the middle of the day, pumping it up into Lake Mead, and then letting it out of Lake Mead through the Hoover Dam, and then regaining that energy. And that's how to store energy, essentially, by pumping water up and then letting it down when you need it back. So we don't have that same sort of thing here. The best we can do and have done is large battery projects like BESS, I believe it's called. The problem with those is they're extremely expensive. Requires a lot of lithium batteries, and that whole thing is very expensive. The one IID does have is black start, meaning if the power goes out, it turns right on. And so no more blackout situations, or at least reduced number of them, and greater reliability. But the lithium batteries are very expensive, and so it's something that it's new technology, and everybody's trying to adapt as quickly as possible because energy is just kind of like an iPhone. It's just always updating all the time, and it's so important to keep on top of things. But,
especially with renewables, it's something that,
right.
I mean, everybody is kind of trying to run to because of climate change. So like everybody's like, oh, renewables, but yet there's, I guess the technology to help store it is not, catching up to the technology we have to create it. I guess that's
right. Yeah, it's want to work as quickly as possible to getting there, but things are still being figured out, and the lithium technology is getting better and better, and lower cost. But on the lithium subject, there's a lot of lithium. in Imperial Valley as we've been able to gather. And that's the wonderful opportunity that not only solar provides, and preferably, just on the subject of solar briefly, is solar not within Imperial Valley. Like there's the large solar project when you're going out to San Diego on I-8, basically that whole southeastern corner of the valley has been covered up by solar. That used to be farmland a few years ago that consumed 5.5 acre feet of water a year. Now there's thousands of acres that consume 0 acre feet a year, 0 water. So the question is what happens with that water? That water that we do not use flows for free to Metropolitan. And it's important that we keep Imperial Valley's water in Imperial Valley, and that means we need to protect farmland or other consumptive uses of water that create a great benefit in Imperial Valley, and ensure that solar projects occur on places where there's no water use for the desert, for instance.
So when you say we got to keep, the water here, you're against privatizing, this natural resources water is.
The most key issue is ensuring that not one drop leaves this valley and that every drop is used here. The concern would be, in any case, is anyone, for any purpose, any entity, any individual, or whatever, would be in a position to move water out of this valley. And that should not be allowed to occur. And there's a lot of concern with that, and it should not happen. And my position is pretty puritanical and strong on this, and that I don't care who it is. We need to use every drop here. We need to achieve maximum utilization of our water right, which means using it here for whatever purpose, for agriculture, for parks, for urban consumption. We need to, planting trees, anything along those lines. We need to use that water here for the benefit of our overall economy, our environment, our people, our families, for our cities. Cities, for instance, they were cut back 25% involuntarily through the California drought, which we were not impacted by because we're part of the Colorado River Basin, which we're affected by, or we get our water from snow in the Rocky Mountains, primarily in Colorado. We don't get our water from the Sierras, Snowpack, which is what most of the rest of the state, through the State Water Project or through Hetchy into the Bay Area gets. I'll just leave it at that. But as pertains to the solar issue, the solar's caused great concern because that's reduced our water use there, and it's freed it up for consumption in other places. We need to make sure it belongs here. And then returning back to that original point was with geothermal and the lithium potential that is there to fuel this green economy that we should be entering into over the next number of decades. Is we have not been in a position where we can make full use of geothermal, which we have a lot of in Imperial County. If you go to Red Hill Bay and you stand up on top of the hill there, you look around, you can see all the geothermal with the steam coming out, 100% carbon-free energy. The only thing, I guess, more climate friendly is hydro energy, hydroelectric. But then there's an impact on the environment of streams and rivers and that sort of thing. So for all intents and purposes, geothermal is the most friendly energy source that there is. And you can look around, and there's even mud pots over by a wetland just to the northeast of Red Hill Bay, where you can see them steaming and bubbling up out of the ground. So it's an immense resource we have that we should take full advantage of, and then free up those lines to move as much of this 100% carbon-free energy out of the valley. We need to be moving power, not water, out of the valley because we will benefit immensely. Geothermal is the number one taxpayer in Imperial County, which we all benefit from immensely. And if it weren't there, we would it'd be a different situation.
Yeah. The ID recently declared an emergency for the Salton Sea. Do you think that was long overdue, or do you think that was that the only way that state will actually, listen and do something, right away about it? Or
so the issue is twofold. First, it was the County of Imperial that declared the state of emergency. The IID joined in as a cooperative partner to answer this emergency that is occurring at the Salton Sea, and then also at the New River as well. Yeah, which is a whole other issue, and IID, I'll get to that in a moment, has an important role to play in that. But essentially what happened is we have the 2003 water transfer. And this, again, gets back to why it's so important that when we enter into and as we move forward to having these agreements on the Colorado River, that any agreement we have has teeth, because we cannot relive another 2003 water transfer experience, in the sense that our transfers were predicated on the Salton Sea being taken care of. And what has happened every year since 2003 is that Imperial Valley has sacrificed year after year after year after year to sending these urban and suburban areas along the coast and in Coachella as well. They've enjoyed immense amount of water from us. And we've done that every year faithfully, of meeting our obligations to their side of the agreement. But it was the other side of agreement to us was that the Salton Sea was going to be taken care of, and that the ecosystem was going to be protected and public health was going to be protected also. 16 years ago, I was in first grade, in a first grade desk, basically learning addition and subtraction and that sort of thing. 16 years later, I graduated from college this June, and the Salton Sea has only gotten infinitely worse. The mitigation water basically ended in 2017, and the sea is racing backwards at this point, receding enormous amounts of shoreline. And so this emergency declaration is definitely needed because it puts the state on record. Is this an emergency or not? Yeah. What the emergency declaration opens up is the opportunity for the state to cut through the red tape and get projects going to protect public health and to improve the ecosystem at the Salton Sea, to ensure that birds have habitat and that they are not threatened, and that the public health is not threatened. When the wind whips through whatever direction from the southeast, it covers up the communities of the western side of the Salton Sea in pretty nasty whiteout conditions of dust blowing off the playa. And then when the wind is blowing from the north or the northwest, it basically covers us up. And you stand out there, heavily recommend this, on a windy day when the wind is blowing out of that direction. Drive out there. Go to just out there to Red Hill Bay near Nyland and Calapat, and you will stand in the middle of a horrible, horrible dust storm. And basically what's in the New River, and that's the connection to the New River, and what has been dumped into the Salton Sea historically over the past 80 years, what's in the New River today will be in our lungs tomorrow if things aren't addressed. And so Salton Sea is an emergency. The New River is an emergency. There's a question sometimes from some critics about, well, why now? Or there's fires going on in California, and is this really necessary right now? And is this an emergency? And it's like, well, when's the proper time? We've been waiting very patiently for 80 years to have clean water flowing through the New River that complies with the United States Clean Water Act, to ensure that we live under the same standards and have the same protections as everybody else, because we're not second-class citizens. We are Americans too in Imperial County, and should be able to enjoy the same clean air and same clean water as everyone else. But both of those amenities, clean air and clean water, are being trampled on by the recession of the Salton Sea, the receding shoreline, and then also the continued dumping of sewage, toxic waste, industrial chemicals into the New River.
What would be like an ideal fix? Like, what? Because I'm sure that there's been millions of ideas. Like, we can do this. What would be something that you can think of that would, if there was the money and manpower to do it, like what would fix the problem?
On the Salton Sea and the New River?
Yeah.
So first, on the Salton Sea, it is the state's responsibility and obligation to live up to their set of obligations. We've met our obligations year after year, and they, year after year, have never met theirs. We're 3 years into a Salton Sea management plan, which IID at Imperial County urged the state to do, which was basically telling the state, please, you've done nothing up to this point. You need to have a plan to do something. We're 3 years into a 10-year plan, and literally nothing has happened. There's been hundreds of millions of dollars been spent, and there's not 1 acre of anything on the ground to protect public health or the ecosystem at the Salton Sea. And so the question has to be at that point, what is the continued viability of these water transfers and their impacts on the Salton Sea when only we are living up to our side of the deal and no one else is, specifically the state. And when others are squashing our efforts to get funding, as we saw last December through the Drought Contingency Plan action from the IID as it pertained to the Salton Sea and DCP nexus. And so the question has to be, what is the viability of the QSA at that point? And is this something that can be continued and sustained if others are not living up to their side of the agreement? That's an important question that needs to be discussed. The other one, as it pertains to the New River, is in Imperial Valley. I forget what the metric is, but everywhere else on the river, for all streams crossing from Mexico into the United States, the fecal coliform amount is like 1,000 parts per something, or colonies per whatever. I don't know what the measurement on, but it's 1,000. In Imperial County, it is 30,000. We literally live under a different standard than everybody else. That's not acceptable. We've been living with 80 years of pollution. We want to be good neighbors with Mexicali and that area, but basically what has been happening is there are business interests there, many of them American business interests, that enjoy the low costs and greater bottom line in Mexico, and then dump all of their refuse and waste and everything else into the New River, which we suffer from here. And I think it should be pretty important as we consider these upcoming agreements with Mexico. They're called minutes, is basically updates to the 1944 water treaty with Mexico. It's so important that water quality is readdressed in the next minute because Mexico wants to ensure that they get their full 1.5 million acre feet. They want the full amount of water. And the United States, for instance, this is a slight sidebar here, and then I'll cut this. There's lots of background on all this stuff. The IID is very complex, and Imperial Valley is very complex. But basically, we have a delivery obligation to Mexico. We have to ensure that they get 1.5 million acre feet a year of water from the Colorado River. And as part of that, there's also a question a couple decades ago about what is the water quality, because at that point, you have every major user on the river, directly on the river, that takes water, like in Imperial Valley, for instance. We take water, we irrigate our fields with it, then there's tile drainage, and then the drains then go out to the Salton Sea. For everybody else, they don't have a Salton Sea. They have the Colorado River. And so they take water off of the river, they irrigate with it, or in the case of southern Nevada, Las Vegas, and those various areas, they take water off of the river, they use it, and then they take their wastewater and they dump it back in the Colorado River. So we basically use everybody else's wastewater, and they get credit for it. So if you take 2 acre feet out and you put 1 acre feet in, you get another acre foot back. So in the case of Yuma, there was this Welton Mohawk area, which is when you're on I-8 and you're going east toward Phoenix, basically on your way to Phoenix or Tucson. That whole area was developed. It's very salty ground in there. So all the drain water from those fields, they dumped it into the Colorado River. So when they put it into the river, the water, and they got return credits from it, the water was very salty at that point. And Mexico, Baja, and Sonora did not like that. And they shouldn't, because the water, when it's that salty, is basically useless. Or the agricultural productivity is so much diminished. So Mexico said, no, this is not acceptable for us. United States, you need to deliver us clean water, or water that meets these specific standards that's usable. And so the response from the United States was they built a $275 million desalting plant in Yuma, and it's been used twice. It's been turned on twice.
Wow.
So when Commissioner Harkins, who visited Calexico a few weeks ago on the New River, and the County of Imperial said, please, we've been dealing with this long enough. This is not an acceptable situation. We want to be treated just like everybody else, and we shouldn't have this toxic river flowing through our backyards. It should be a clean river, not a toxic one. And we want a wastewater facility so that all the water that flows down the New River is clean, not filthy. And seems like a pretty basic thing, right? And we'd like that wastewater facility built so it complies with the Clean Water Act, just like everybody else. And her thing was, no appetite for that. We don't want to build that. Well, okay. So the United States built a $275 million facility in Yuma. They've turned it on twice to ensure that water, basically that drain water, when it was put back in the Colorado River, was desalted. They changed their practices basically along the river so they didn't end up putting the salt in the first place, but they built this facility for $275 million and never turned it on. Huh. All we're asking is something, a fraction of that, put it in Calexico and ensure that Imperial Valley people are not being exposed to the toxicity and the biological contamination of the New River, and ultimately it deposits into the Salton Sea, and that is a vital ecosystem that has to be protected. And so yeah, there are solutions. It is a much larger discussion, but I guess one of the themes here is that in Imperial Valley, everything is downstream from water. Everything connects back to water at the end of the day, or at least upstream from it is water. And so a lot of the solutions, a lot of the problems are about water, but as we move forward, water is going to be the key, and we have to look at that perspective, and we have to put Imperial Valley and our interests at the top of the page and ensure that we're working to build a better future over the next 50 to 100 years, much like the pioneers did at the beginning of the last century.
We talked about you had Upspace and other small businesses. The ID has a budget of around
about $800 million, 850 or so.
How do you think you can, you would be able to manage or help manage such a, big budget? Like, what experiences do you bring to the table that would?
Sure, it's a big budget. There's a lot that goes into it. Ultimately, the board is not in a position to, as it's sometimes said, micromanage or that sort of thing. The board has a budget. It should be in a position to set policy and determine the most important things that are of public interest to the people of Imperial Valley. Budgeting, all of that, it's a complex subject, but it is things work pretty well. The guys who go out and ensure that we have power every day, and the guys that deliver water every day, nothing really there needs to be changed too much. There's a lot of efficiency that could be had, specifically on the power side, in terms of just keeping things as low cost as possible. And reinvesting in reliability and that sort of thing. But primarily, the budget is something that has to be reviewed continuously, and not just once a year in a budget session, but that you're constantly reviewing and looking at individual pieces and how can we optimize here? Do we actually need to invest more in this or that? And there's a lot of places that need investment at IID. Quality of life is a big one. But yeah, there's many different components, but it cannot be something that you micromanage, but it has to be something that you're constantly working through the entirety of the budget, operations. How can you ensure that everything is operating as trim and lean as possible so we can ensure that ratepayers of both water and power pay the lowest possible costs? And so there's some business acumen and skill needed there, but in many ways, IID is its own animal, and so it operates in kind of unique ways. And so there's a little bit of a learning curve, but ultimately it's persistence and applying those principles to everyday sort of operations and decision making.
So we're at an hour and 10 now, and I guess my final question would be, we talked about water, electricity. Even the IID even deals with unions and all these complex things.
Right.
Why now at 24, take that, when I was 24, I was like doing other things.
Sure.
I got married at 25, but, I guess something that I could compare it with is like being a father. Like there's no manual for being a father.
Right. There's no manual for being an IID director either.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Why at such a young age, take this big step towards, running for IID?
Right. I think the traditional idea, or at least what we've seen over the past number of decades or century or something, is that, running for IID or something along these lines is something you do. You climb a ladder or something, and then you finally get up to the point where you do that, or you have a specific business interest in mind, you run for that. And you're, I don't know, late 40s, 50s, 60s, or something, and running for that. But as I see it, in my campaign is, in a nutshell, is water is life. And over the next 6 years, these key agreements will expire on the Colorado River. What happens there and how Imperial Valley plays a role in that will determine not only the future of Imperial Valley specifically, but the Colorado River Basin in the American Southwest more generally. I bring with me pretty extensive knowledge as it applies to these Colorado River issues. That is the number one thing that will affect the future of Imperial Valley. The power is right there along with it. That's critical too, but we will always have power. Water is not necessarily a guarantee. And it's not necessarily something I would say is it's something I guess I should say I feel called to do, because now is the time that we have to protect this vital resource for the next century. The time is ticking on these agreements, basically going to 2026. And what happens then is basically going to set things very firmly in the future. There's a lot that can be of good that can be had in this over this short while. There's a lot that could not go so good, or a lot of opportunities that could be missed. And I want to ensure that we maximize all of the good and we don't get any of the raw sort of stuff. Imperial Valley needs to set the terms on this river as we move forward, not have the terms set for us by others. That is something I feel very strongly and firmly about. Imperial Valley gets the short stick a lot of the time. It's because we have very little representation, the population issues and all this, but we have the most vital resource basically anywhere. A lot of people want it. Yeah. You have to protect it and keep it here. It's not a timeline that I would say that I necessarily would choose. I would much rather, be touring around and going whitewater rafting or something in Western Colorado, or learning more and going to law school and that sort of thing, or touring around the Grand Canyon and other fun water stuff. But basically, this is such a vital issue, and it's happening now. It's in effect here, and it's going to affect us now. We have to act quickly, study this river system very intensely, and I don't want to have another 1997 and 2003 situation again. I want to make sure that the day I'm seated in early December of 2020, that we're basically in a position where we can begin working intensively to protect Imperial Valley and ensure our interests are preserved and we keep the water here. That's not an opportunity I'll necessarily get 40 years from now, or 20 or 30 years from now. And so timetable is a little bit different, but it doesn't change the fact that the issues are so vitally important, and that we have to act quickly and work smart and study history and work to identify what our interests are, and there are many, but speak as one voice as a community to preserving that and working with others across the basin to preserve our collective interest in preserving rural communities and not have them be steamrolled by major suburban areas who want our water and don't really care what happens to us.
Yeah. All right. Well, JB, anything else that you would like to add that we didn't touch?
I would say if you live in South El Centro, Heber, and Sealy, get out and vote on March 3rd, or actually before then, starting February 3rd. Ballots come out in the mail absentee. So vote early, vote often.
Where can people follow you and check out your
you can check me out on Facebook. It's JB Hamby for IID Director, and we'll have a website completed here shortly.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking some time off and being a guest on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Like I said, it's not an endorsement. I wish you the best of luck.
Appreciate it.
I want to invite everybody, any other candidates, to hit me up. You can send me an email. Pasa Calexico. It's QUEPASACALEXICO @gmail.com. Pasacalexico @gmail.com. Send me an email if you want to be a guest on the podcast. Shout out to my friends Weso, Andrade, and Lopez. And yeah, thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.